The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. My name is Adrian Benjamins and I'm joined today with Neil Rochlani. Neil, how are you?
Doing great, my friend. How are you?
Good, man. It's Friday. We made it to the end of another week. We're about to hit that NBA lull, as I like to call it, where, right when summer league ends and free agency winds down, we've got like a month period. It's like the slowest period, the slowest time in the NBA offseason. And, Neil, I was about to say that I'm a little sad and bored about this time of year. And right when I was about to do that, we got a Woj bomb yesterday.
The hits keep coming, right?
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? We got to get into this trade a little bit. Carmelo is moving, or not really, because the Hawks are going to waive him. He's going to likely end up with the Rockets. But anyways, Mello got dealt to Atlanta. Dennis Schroder is going to head to OKC. And then some other parts ended up being like a three-way deal. Justin Anderson is headed to the Hawks. Mike Muscala is headed to the Sixers. Timothy LaRue Cabaret is headed to the Thunder. Neil, what are your thoughts on this?
I like how you try to pronounce TLC's name.
I can't. I should just say, you know what? I just wanted to try to say it one time. For the rest of the show, I'm going to say TLC because I know I'm butchering that name badly.
Well, at least you have the courage to try. I don't even begin. So I guess the two main players on this that are relevant for fantasy, unless I'm missing something, are Mello and Schroder. I don't even know if that's Schrader. I get his name wrong too. Do you think Mello was sort of like a low end value last year, and Dennis, I'll just call him Dennis because his last name is challenging. I don't think he has any value in OKC. Do you have any first thoughts about this? So I want to see where Mello goes first before I even say what his value is. The Rockets are sort of, I guess, the assumption, but it's not definite yet. So I don't want to try to figure that out just yet. What are your thoughts on this trade?
So, for me, Mello has been a guy that I've avoided for a long time. And I feel like now it's just standard. Everybody else feels the same way. Mello's just a guy you don't draft. Really overrated, glorified scorer. That's about it. Doesn't do anything else. And now he doesn't even do scoring that well. Not very efficient. So I think, we don't even need to say to avoid Mello. Now, I'm a little curious if he joins the Rockets. We know the Rockets have one of the best paces, one of the most offensively friendly offenses in the NBA. So I'm a little curious if maybe he can get some late round value, but definitely not a guy that I'm targeting. One of the other things, too, that makes it interesting is the Rockets lost a lot of depth on the wing. They lost Trevor Ariza. So it kind of makes you wonder if Mello can fill a need that they have. But I just wouldn't bet on it, Neil. I wouldn't target it. Really bummed about Schroder because I just feel like his fantasy value just takes a major hit playing either behind or next to Russell Westbrook, who I call the black hole of fantasy because he just sucks up all the fantasy stats. So, Neil, do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Dennis Schroder. I don't think he's going to have any value this year unless, Russ gets an injury and he's out for a while. As far as Mello, you're right. If he goes to the Rockets, there is a chance he has some relevancy, and maybe he has lost all sort of fantasy value now. I was speaking with Dan last week, and we were going over free agents and guys who were re-signing, and we talked about Gerald Green in Houston maybe being relevant this year because they lost so many wings. So to your point, if Mello is there and he is relied on to take a bunch of 3-pointers. I mean, he could have some value there in points and in 3-pointers, and he's still a decent rebounder, and can get some other stats as well. So I'm not going to target him until the end of the draft, but if he's sitting there in the late rounds, I'd take a flyer on him for sure.
Yes, and the interesting pieces from this trade as well, for really deep leagues, I'm really curious to see if Justin Anderson can do anything in Atlanta. This is a guy that I own in my 30-team dynasty league, and when we did this draft 3 seasons ago, I thought that he could be a solid player when he was with the Dallas Mavericks, and it hasn't happened for him. So I'm really curious. Atlanta's not the deepest team on the wing. I know they got Taurean Prince and Kent Bazemore, who they've been trying to move for a while. DeAndre Bembry. So, there is still a lot of competition there, but I'm curious if he can get in the rotation and I felt at one time Justin Anderson had a lot of promise, and I kind of want to see that from him again. The other thing, too, about this trade is Mike Muscala, who we've seen him have some fantasy value in the right situation. Not too excited about him going to the Sixers. So, really the only guys that we're really paying attention to, as you mentioned, are Mello and Schroder. And I'm not too high on either of those guys. Neil, any close? Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up Justin Anderson. I thought he might have some potential too, initially when he came in the league. And in the situation, we'll see if that's actually just a move they wanted to get a player, or it was just more something they had to do to make the trade happen. I don't really know enough to understand the circumstances, but yeah, he's someone to at least put on your watch list and see how he pans out.
And the other thing we need to mention, Neil, we're going deep cuts into this trade right now. We're taking a deep dive into it. It's the interesting thing about this trade is what it does for guys like Jeremy Lin and Trae Young now have that Atlanta backcourt all to themselves. So it improves, it was a 3-headed monster. We all kind of knew that Schroder was likely going to get moved, and so now that helps that backcourt. The other thing that's a little interesting is Mike Muscala leaving that Hawks front court. The Hawks are not super deep in their front court. Their depth chart right now is looking like Dwayne Dedmon to start at center, John Collins at power forward. It's not too deep after those two guys. So Mike Muscala leaving kind of improves the value of both those guys. And Neil, I was high on John Collins. I'm even higher now, man. I love John Collins for fantasy this year. I might be reaching on him pretty early. And by early, I'm still only saying maybe 5th round or 6th round. But I think that's a lot earlier than what most people were expecting. What do you think about that, Neil?
I don't think you're going to be alone. I think he's going to get so much hype this year. He showed last year in limited time he could produce some pretty good fantasy stats and some good reality basketball playing. So I think he's a future piece of that team, and they're going to run him out there and give him, I assume, a lot of usage and a lot of minutes, and I think he can put up great stats. I am worried, though, that he's going to be so hyped that you may have to take him in the mid rounds, to get him, like you said. And maybe he'll live up to that. He certainly has the potential to. I usually don't take guys. We'll see. I usually don't take guys in the middle rounds. At least I have a pretty strong indication they can definitely do it. And maybe he's in that category. I'm pretty cautious when it comes to taking a flyer that early. So I don't think I'll be there with the hype, but I think you're right in that he's going to be a very good fantasy player, more likely than not. It's just if I have the risk or the willingness to pull the trigger that early on him. One more thing about Atlanta. Yeah, so this Jeremy Lin now becomes a really interesting prospect for me. I will definitely target him in the late rounds. I'm hoping he falls until 10th or later, and if he's there, I'll pick him up. I think he can have a solid year. The only concern is his injury risk, which is obviously a big concern, but as far as usage and as far as ability and fantasy stats, he can do very good low end fantasy starter minutes and fantasy starter stats. So I like him this season. Hopefully he can stay healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good take, Neil. And Jeremy Lin, didn't really play at all last season. So I think he's kind of flying under the radar a little bit. And I'm really curious where he's going to get drafted, what his average draft position looks like, what his ranking preseason looks like. Because as you mentioned, a guy you might be able to get late who, we know if he's healthy and given the role, he can produce. So could be a really sneaky pick in your fantasy drafts. And Neil, I think this is a good segue to get into our next topic, which is maybe a little more mock draft theory and mock draft strategy, or just preseason preparation in general. Because you had just been talking about how I might not be alone about John Collins being mid-round, fifth round type of a pick. And where we're really going to know and find out is in these mock drafts and in this, prep that we're going to be doing coming into the season. So, Neil, do you do mock drafts? Are you a mock draft guy? What's your strategy like?
I haven't done mock drafts the last couple of years. I did it when I first started playing fantasy just to get the feel for it. But, you may have convinced me when I heard you on the episode the other day that how important it is for mocks. I think one thing that I think is very useful, which Dan brought up as well, is that when you're just looking at ADP, the average draft position, it doesn't reflect the current draft position. So when a guy's flying up the charts, it's hard to know exactly where they're being drafted just based on that list, the average draft position. You really have to go into a mock and kind of see, and probably several to get a feel for it. So I might just go back to it to see what I can learn. For me, the mock drafts are more about trying a strategy and then see where, so I'll go, I know you've talked a lot about your draft strategy, and I'm still trying to figure out mine as I go along in learning this whole fantasy stuff. And I use the mocks to see where do I get distracted? Why do I go off my strategy? What happens in a mock draft and I'm like, oh God, now I'm going to do this because this guy's there and I didn't think he was going to be there, and now maybe I should take him. And then how flustered or how off course do I get, and how do I course correct? So it's really, for me, it's more the emotional part of when I make a decision that I wasn't planning on making, how do I then, what do I do? What do I do in the moment? And that can really help me prepare for the reality draft.
Neil, I am going to force you to do a lot of mock drafts this season. You're going to get a call from me saying, Neil, I'm about to jump into this mock draft. Get in here, bud. Get in this room with me. Mock with me. I know I'm kind of a nerd and a dork when it comes to this, but for me, it's just really fun. I get geeked about what kind of team I can build. And I always try to focus, most of my teams or most of my leagues are around the 12 team range. So I usually stick to a 12 team, on Yahoo. I think you can go as low as 8 to 10, 12, and I think as high as 14. So I'll usually do a 10 or a 12. And then, Neil, I'll literally practice drafting in every position. I believe I mentioned this on last show. On Yahoo, there's a random number generator. Every time before I do my mock draft, I have it make me pick whatever number it gives me, 7, 6, 5. I'll pick that spot in my mock draft. And it gets to the point where you have a plan so that when in your real draft, I just got the third pick, I pretty much know who I'm going to take. I pretty much know who I'm targeting in the second round. And if my draft goes as expected, I get my targets, I know what I'm going to do in the middle rounds. And so it just really gets you tuned in. I love knowing what's happening in the fantasy world when players are moving. I love knowing about it in real time. And I feel like you get really tuned in when you're doing these mock drafts regularly. Oh, hey, Neil, let's say you and I are doing a show. We're talking about this guy. I can tell you, hey, people aren't loving this guy, Neil. He's falling in mock drafts. Hey, last week he was getting drafted in the 4th round. this week he fell all the way to round 7. Like, it's nice to be tuned into that, like that kind of stuff. But anyways, I think it's fun. I get so bored in the off season, and for me, it's just a lot of fun. So I hope you kind of jump in there with me and do these mock drafts, because it's just fun prep stuff. What do you think?
Oh yeah, man. Hey, hit me up anytime. I'd be happy to mock with you. I want to, but what I really like about what you're talking about there is really interesting, because we, as fantasy analysts and fantasy players, we're always trying to value, like, where do I rank this guy? Where would I target this guy? And it's really also good not just to know where you would target someone, but also where the market is sort of placing someone. And so when you're doing all those mock drafts, you're getting a feel for the market for this player. Like, is he a 4th round guy? Is he a 7th round guy now? And that's really helpful too, because you not only want to draft the guys you like, you want to draft them, in a place that makes sense. You don't want to reach for someone if you can get them in the 7th round and, take them in the 4th. You don't want to waste that opportunity. So to know exactly where the market is. And obviously every draft is a little unique. So your own home draft may be different than what the market does, but to have a good overall feel is very important. So I think I'm going to try this. I'm going to get into this more. I totally can geek out too. Like, I can build like a mock team, and then I can, like, in my head play an entire fantasy season and put up a trophy in my room thinking I just won something. So, it's like fantasy squared. It's like fantasy on fantasy. It's just crazy.
I'm really glad that you mentioned how different it can be in your home league, because my home league, Neil, is crazy. And, I thought I had it all figured out. I had done over 150 mock drafts. I'd done my rankings. I knew. And my home league, Neil, is so nuts, because you got people coming to the draft with, somebody has their rankings from Hoopball. One guy comes with their rankings from Roto World. One guy comes with their rankings from ESPN. One guy brought a magazine, and I didn't even know that they still sold those things. It's like, so, when you're doing these mock drafts constantly on Yahoo, everybody in that mock draft is drafting off the same list. They're seeing the player available list going off the board, so everyone's looking at the same list. Where in your home league, people are going off completely different lists. And I'm telling you, Neil, it threw a wrench into my draft, where, like, guys were going off the board that I thought would be available in, like, round 7. These guys were going off the board in, like, round 3. Like Kyle Kuzma, for example, because my league is such a Laker homer league, Kyle Kuzma went off the board in, like, round 4. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, what's going on right now? So I think you made a really good point about, you can be really prepared, and you still kind of don't know what's going to happen in your real draft. But being prepared is great, though, because in a lot of these leagues, like especially in Yahoo, you don't have a lot of time to make your pick, and it's just nice when you know what you're going to do ahead of time or who you're targeting. And one other thing I wanted to point out, Neil, is when I very first start doing mock drafts, I go real slow, meaning I'm drafting off of a sheet. As the weeks go on, I don't need that sheet anymore. Like, I already know I can just set up my queue, and then now all of a sudden, Neil, I might be mock drafting, like, while I'm watching something. I'm, like, kind of into soccer and like Premier League. I'll watch a Premier League and have a mock draft going on in the background and stuff. So it gets to that point where you get that automatic and tuned in.
That's great. Yeah, the more you can get comfortable with knowing the players and where they're going, and yeah, so this also goes back to some of the, if I can just transition a little bit to other things I do over the summer, is starting to get a feel for the depth charts of every team, and starting to break out every player. If you want to get really into the weeds as you prepare for your fantasy draft, there's about a universe of 150 players in most leagues that you need to sort of figure out. And then if you're in a rotisserie league, 9-cat or 8-cat, there's those statistical categories. So it's not a giant universe. It's certainly not a small universe to sort of get a handle on. But if you're just bored and you like fantasy stuff, you can start to get into listing the players that you think are going to be ranked or that are going to be fantasy relevant, and starting to get into their statistics. You can start with last year's, using their average over the year, and then start to figure out how you would tweak it It's also fun for me to kind of just do my own rankings and my own projections, and then compare them with other experts, on ESPN or Yahoo, and see where the difference is. And it's also it's more just like me trying to like I really like to try to figure out where things are going, and just in general in life, like predict things, and it's just one more way to engage in that. So hopefully that made some sense. Do you have any thoughts on how you go about doing research? Do you try to get a handle on every player in the market, or what do you
So, I take a similar approach to you in this slow time, in this lull period that are coming up. I'm going to build a ranking sheet. I did just do it on a spreadsheet by position. So, I got one column: point guard, shooting guard, small forward. And what I do, as you said, I go through the depth charts team by team, and I start putting these players down in my spreadsheet. For example, I'll start with the Hawks. Jeremy Lin, Bazemore, Taurean Prince. I put them down. Go to the next team. D'Angelo Russell. Okay, I have him marked. In my head, he's a better player than Jeremy Lin. So on the spreadsheet, I'll put him above Jeremy Lin. And I go through every single team till I have every fantasy relevant player, I feel, through all the depth charts on my spreadsheet. And as you mentioned, in a 12-team league, you're talking like 156 player pool. So I looking at the team depth charts is key, because you really get a sense of, man, how crowded is this team, or wow, this team is lacking a lot of depth, and here's this really good player right here in the spot who can get all of this usage. So you really see all of that, when you're looking at the depth charts and you're building your own rankings. The other thing I like to do on this ranking sheet, Neil, I like to mark my do not draft players I'm fading. So I'll just, like, in yellow, mark all those players that I'm avoiding. And then in green, I'll mark the players that, like, I want this year. I was just talking about John Collins. He's going to be green for me. I love Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen, all these guys that I'm super high on. I'm going to be, have those guys marked in bold because I want those guys. What are your thoughts, Neil?
Yeah, so I do the master list of all the players, do every category, start with maybe last year's statistics as just my baseline, and then look at their usage, look at their minutes, look at their new situation, and then try to come up with some reasonable calculation. It helps to do a team total to make sure you're not going crazy on minutes and all the different categories, points, and so forth. So that's what I do. I almost want to get in a draft with you just so I can draft John Collins first. Maybe I go Mitchell 1 and Collins 2. Just
you know what, too, Neil?
You're gonna go rip up your sheet and walk out of the room or something.
Neil, you're gonna be very mad at me because I was pimping hard my draft strategy of point guards, centers, heavy, and I may be backing up a little bit on that this season, Neil. I mean, I haven't done my rankings yet, and I haven't done any mock drafts yet, so I'm still... But let me tell you, Neil, we were just talking about Jeremy Lin. There's some centers. I love all these new centers and bigs that just came out of the draft. These guys are all going to go... They're not going to go super early. So, guys like I just mentioned, Jared Allen, you don't need to spend an early round draft pick. A sneaky guy like DJ Augustine, he's going to be the starting point guard in Orlando. You likely can get this guy with the last 3 picks. I may be fading my draft strategy just a tad, Neil. And I'm really bummed to say that because I was really excited to kind of show off that draft strategy this season. But there's a lot of centers and point guards that I'm taking a look at real early still. But I think there's some guys that you can get late. So I don't know, Neil, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so let's go to point guards really quick. I think that's in an 8-category league, point guards can be very valuable because they contribute to many stats. The assists are hard to get. They usually get steals. Some get 3-pointers and points. And free throw percentage tends to be really solid on point guards. So those guys can be more valuable than other positions, and they tend to go off the board early. I like to start in a 10-team starting role if you have, the 5 starting positions, your 2 guard forward, and then 3 utility. Excuse me. I like to have 3 point guards in my rotation. So I'd like to get 2 early on that I'm pretty solid with, and then try to get 2 towards the end that I think one might really stand out. So unless something changes my draft. So I agree with you. There are guys going to be towards the end that might be available, but like Lynn and Augustine, that's your third option.
Hey, let me run a couple guys.
Beverly might be there late too. There's a lot of these like point guards who people are probably sleeping on. Go ahead.
Let me run a couple other guys by you. In Phoenix, Brandon Knight might be the starting point guard in Phoenix. Now, not a high-end point guard, but I'm talking about Brandon Knight's. We didn't even see him last season. I believe he sat out the entire season. He's really flying under the radar. We've seen him before put up some decent fantasy value. This is a guy you might be able to get in like the last 3 rounds of your draft. Another guy who's a little sneaky, the rookie Colin Sexton in Cleveland with LeBron gone. And there's some like rumors that George Hill could maybe be out of Cleveland. He's a sneaky, likely a guy that you don't have to, like a mid-round later guy. So I'm telling you, Neil, this is the first year where like there are some late guys in the point guard and center category that are catching my eye, and it's kind of making me wonder, maybe I don't need to go so heavy on the point guards and centers to start my draft. So I got it in the back of my mind, but I'm really going to solidify how I feel when the mock drafts open and when like my rankings are done to see exactly how it shakes out. What else you got? Yeah. What else you got as far as like prep, getting ready for the season?
Yeah. So I know we don't have a lot of time this morning to record, but there are a couple other things I wanted to bring up that I do in the off season. So in addition to, you talked about mocks and then starting with the research of players and the depth charts and getting sort of the handle on the universe of players. If you have access, I like to look at my draft last year. I'm able to go and see how it played out and kind of see what strategy did I have going into it and how did I effectively or not effectively implement that strategy and where did I deviate from it and maybe why. And it's more just to see how did I react in the moment when things didn't go the way I thought, or what did I do differently than I thought going in, and that just helps me to sort of get better at this. The other thing I do. Oh, okay. I was just going to mention 2 more things, and then
go for it.
Is that all right? Okay. So then two more things I want to talk about real quickly. I look at the standings from last year in my league, and all the stats are there. I do 8 cat rotisserie in my home league, so I will go through and see. Okay, the first place person in this category got this many stats and assists. The first place person in this category, and so forth. And then I figure out how many assists I need for my team per player and how many points I need per player. And I start to build a model in terms of what I need in order to get so many rotisserie points and win the league. So that's a really shorthand way of saying I'm just trying to understand the metrics of my specific league to figure out what I need to do well the following season. And it's pretty much holds up. The 2 categories that are changing are field goal percent as more people taking threes, and then 3-pointers are going up because the trend on 3-pointers is going up. And then I think that's basically it for now. I don't want to get too much into that. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and we'll dive deeper into this, guys. We're running low on time, so we're gonna probably wrap this up. As this lull period goes on, we'll get deeper into prep, more mock drafts. I'm going to be tweeting and posting a lot of my thoughts early on mock drafts. Like, I'll let you guys know, like, whoa, just finished my 5th mock draft and can't believe this guy's going undrafted, or, hey, target these guys with your last pick. So I'll be posting a lot of thoughts. And hey, it'll be a lot of fun, man. Maybe we should get some of these listeners in on we'll do a hoop ball mock draft with you and I and some of the listeners and stuff. So, Neil, you and I will get heavier into prep, draft strategy, what our thoughts are. How are things shaking out with the mock drafts, with the rankings, what we agree with, what we don't agree with. Neil, I'm pumped to be like with you guys with the Hoop Ball crew. I joined mid-season, so I wasn't with Hoop Ball for the this is like the best time of year, man. Getting ready for your draft is almost as fun as the season. Doing your draft and prepping and all this stuff, I love it. So I'm really happy to be a part of Hoop Ball for this time of year, and I think we're gonna have a lot of fun, Neil. So all right, Neil, closing thoughts on the show.
Yeah, closing thoughts. Yeah, the draft is so important, as you know, and I guess anyone who's probably listening to this podcast knows. It's probably the biggest determinant of how you're going to do in your season. So doing a lot of prep certainly helps. Doing the right type of prep helps. So, and if you're really just like a fantasy geek like we are, and you have fun, I just go with it and keep figuring out how to do better. We can talk about different things to improve that and things that I've learned over the years. So, that's what I got for now, Adrian. Hey, man, have a great weekend. Are you going to be jet setting anywhere this weekend yourself?
No, I'm going to be taking it easy. I think I do have a camping trip maybe planned next weekend. It's still kind of in works, so it's not a for sure thing. But this weekend, I'm going to be laying low, just hanging out at the pool. It's hot here in Southern California, Neil. It's 8:45 a.m. and I'm sweating like a dog over here. So I'm just going to try to stay cool, relax, just chill out. Neil, thank you so much for talking to me. You guys, hit Neil and I up on Twitter, at Ball with Neil. I'm at Adrian Benjamins. We want to get into some listener questions on the next show, so hit us up with whatever you got, and we would love to talk about it on the next show. Neil, thank you so much, man. I hope you have a great weekend, and thanks a lot, guys.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.